All right, folks. Well, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And then you can see on this page, and I've dropped it in the chat a couple times, our the link to resources if you want to check out session resources on our Rural Life website, which has materials for you as lead teacher, specifically in your role within the grant. And then also there's a section for leaders. They actually have their second session tomorrow. So we'll got a busy week this week with Rural Life. All right, Catherine, we ready to kick it off? And I'll keep watching for folks who maybe join us here in the next minute or so, but we'll get this party started.
All right, if you all see Bethany doing like this to me, I'm the talker. So Bethany, when she does this, means I gotta move on. Catherine, and there's Bethany, and we're I think everybody that was at the first session is back, and we're so glad to see you. And you'll hear this a couple of times. Please feel free to reach out to us. Put in your chat. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but the session is being recorded. And I would love for you to put your name and your school, your role, your grade. And, you know, we hope that our last session at least got you thinking. Did you use one tech tool or anything? Did you do the Jamboard? Did you anything? What did you try to increase student engagement? So if you all will go to chat and do that, we'll keep moving because we're going to be on time.
Girl, keep this rolling.
And I'm not going to talk much about the Zoom other than we just hope that you'll be involved and we can see your faces, and because they're good faces. All right. And our learning space, we want you to feel like to be comfortable. You know, surely you're not shy with Bethany and me at this point. And certainly you shouldn't be shy about the cameras. And we hope that you'll feel compelled to share and discuss because that's what your colleagues want. We learn from each other, and I'm telling you, as old as I am and as long as I've been in education, my teachers teach me something every time I'm with them. So share, and above all, let's have some fun. And this is a good reason to go home and say, I'm not cooking supper.
I like
I did that last night.
That's okay.
Tonight.
So just a quick recap, you know, our lead teacher collaborative is for you all as lead teachers, right? This is such an important role to the work of this grant. I mean, we value not only your expertise, but you know, your experiences. Like Catherine said, we want you to bring all that together because our goals are to really build a sense of community across the 31 rural life schools. We had 36 in the last cohort, so this would be the second phase, 31 schools. Really, like Catherine said, reflect on and share about your work, right? You want to hear from each other and engage in some professional learning that's tied to the work of the grant. So our agenda or our road trip, we're kind of keeping the same theme as we had last time, engagement or bust, the road to get us there, right? Our journey is going to continue. And this time we're thinking about engaging at new levels. We're going to stop and chat and think about engaging student ownership. And in that case, we're actually going to see an example lesson, a virtual lesson with real teacher, real students, 8th graders. And I hope you are as pumped as Catherine and I are about that. And then engage them in personal reflection. All right, so with that in mind, again, this is like the first little, like the second part of our two-part first round of affinity groups. And so our objectives, if I'm getting to pop up here, come on. All right, again, explore what cognitive engagement looks like, right? Kind of taking a deep dive into cognitive engagement. We're going to reflect on the role of the teacher in planning and supporting authentic opportunities for really meaningful engagement. And we're going to lead this session with some resources to support increased engagement. And that ties to an action item that's going to come at the end of this session, really across all the affinity group sessions. So all the lead teachers who are involved right now will get the same action item. And that's going to be tied to sharing your learning with your colleagues in your school. But we've got kind of a nifty way our communications director has pulled together some resources to help you share. So the burden's not on you. But we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. All right, so stop.
All right, so we said we were going to engage at some new levels. We're going to revisit very briefly some of the frameworks that we previously looked at, and then we're going to kind of do a deep dive into some of the elements of cognitive engagement. And then I hope and I pray that we do some reflection on the frameworks and look back at our own bridge to practice. The key, you all remember this because I can't tell you enough about this book, but 3 frameworks: behavioral, emotional, and cognitive. And it takes, for that great lesson and for that great engagement moment, you really need all 3. We talked a lot about the behavioral, emotional the last time we were together. Today, maybe a little bit more in the cognitive. This is the book that was a study by students that someone did, and they asked students, what does it take to be engaged? And they looked at these 3 areas. You saw this slide last time: the behavioral, the emotional, the cognitive. And of course, when you go back into here, remember, this link down here was a great link to the book with some excerpts and some video. And when you see me out in your schools, say, Catherine, bring that good book.
Thanks, Catherine. Catherine, you want to take them on into this deep dive to kick us started with levels of thinking?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is back to Teacher 101 when you were back in your undergraduate work. You all remember Bloom and Webb's. Well, folks, this stuff is still very relevant, and it's still just a wonderful framework. I'm telling you, it's worth printing, and it's worth having in your planner to think as you plan. Are you applying some of these theories, because they do work? Sometimes it's as simple as how you frame your questions on the level of engagement you're going to get from students. And so we do have a link down here. If you want to come back to this and study the Bloom's and the Webb's depth of knowledge, you should. It should be kind of our Bible in the classroom a little bit.
And we have a couple resources at the end that we'll highlight that are tied to this too. So we'll circle back to this toward the end. But really, while we introduce this, kind of while we layer this on top of what the research says about engagement, and then what students have told us really engages them, is that, and we want to bring this all together, right? And in summary, there are 2 facets of engagement that educators should consider. One would be, like we've seen, is that participation aspect. Who participates, how often, to what degree are they participating? This is, a lot to do with those behaviors. If we think about that 3-part Venn diagram, what are the participation behaviors? How do we get kids involved? How do we support them being involved, right, as teachers? But then we want to layer on this idea of thinking, right? Cognitive engagement. We know that emotional aspect is critical, right? That they really got to kind of buy in. And we heard what the students said when Catherine shared that research. But also we're thinking here about the depth and the quality of the thinking in which students are asked to engage, right? And who asked them to engage, right? That's us, right? Us as educators. Now, what I think is really fascinating and very encouraging from the research around the thinking aspect is that even when students are facing just a slew of adverse educational experiences, maybe they have, maybe not very supportive parents, or they've had a lot of, adverse experiences in their childhood, or maybe, they are several grades behind, right? They're in your 8th grade class, but they can only read on a 3rd grade level. What's interesting, and it was even echoed in the research that Catherine shared from the Just Ask Us book from students, they actually do want to be engaged, right? They might not always act like it, but they do want to engage. And for us, it's just about crafting a lesson that moves them toward that level of engagement. And so we know that school and classroom culture are huge for that. And we know, like I said, classroom, that lesson design is critical in engaging those students. But we know, again, from the research, very encouraging, that they can and do excel when we put before them really rigorous levels of activities and thinking. So we want to layer on now one more Let me let somebody in here. One more framework, and that's the cognitive engagement matrix. So as you'll see here, if I can get this to work, students cannot have true, meaningful student ownership of learning without high levels of both participation and thinking. And so it's this matrix that pulls them together in a handy dandy little quadrant format here for us to think about. And so again, we're looking at this relationship between participation and cognition, or as we mentioned a second ago, that high level of thinking. So with this in mind, let's take just a moment to dig into these quadrants and talk about what they kind of really look like in the classroom. And I want us to start at quadrant 2. So low cognition, high participation. Here you have lots of students who are engaged. You might see lots of hands raised. Kids are having fun. They're engaged, right? Everybody's, maybe writing something down or they're taking notes, but you see a lot of students actively engaged in the lesson, which that's great. But if what they're engaged in, if the task before them doesn't ask them to work at the expectation of the standards, right, we're sitting at that low cognition phase. And so that would be quadrant 2. Now on the flip side, if we jump over to quadrant 3, maybe the task itself has rigorous questions and tasks, right, that really builds over the course of the lesson. But maybe due to some participation techniques that we're using as a teacher, we're maybe only calling on 1 or 2 students, or we're letting it be a lot of like raising hands and it's just the same 4 students who raise their hand. Or maybe there's a way for students just to kind of slide by without really having to ever pick up a pencil or type anything in the chat or engage on a Jamboard, right? So here we've got low participation. Even though the cognition is high, we don't have enough students really involved in that high level thinking. All right, over to quadrant 4. This is our goal, right? We want to build to this pretty quickly in a lesson. Of course, we realize, like Catherine showed us with Bloom's and Webb's, that we build up to some of these higher levels of thinking, and we have to support that, realistically speaking, right? But we want to move toward the expectation of the standards, high cognition, and we want to find ways to get as many students involved the most of the class period, right? That means they are actively engaged in some way through most of the class period. Now I want to contrast that a little bit with quadrant 1, right? This one seems like, well, I kind of get it, right? Low cognition, maybe the tasks aren't very rigorous and nobody's really participating. But we could have also what falls into this quadrant, an example where the task looks like it's high cognition. Maybe it's got a lot of those rigorous questions and tasks that really build and sequence, really build knowledge for students. But if we as the teacher are owning the thinking, right? So we're asking questions, but then nobody really responds. So we answer the question ourselves, or we ask the question in such a way that it's only a yes or no type answer and doesn't really dig into some deep learning, right? We're cutting off the level of cognition that students can own themselves. And so we kind of slip back into quadrant 1. So again, this is just another framework for us to consider, what does engagement look like in my classroom? And with that, we want to circle back to our Bridge to Practice Padlet. And so now we want you to think just about the activities that you shared on our Bridge to Practice Padlet. Now we know sometimes life happens and maybe you didn't get a chance to post, but we were so excited to see so many posts. So we appreciate you posting on the Padlet. But ask yourself, in what quadrant would each of my activities fall? And push yourself to answer why. Right? We want you to use those guiding questions for your reflection. And I'm going to exit out of that and bump over here to our Padlet. And
I put the link, Bethany, I put the link in chat too.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. So what you might notice now that, of course, you wouldn't have noticed when you read this pink Post-it note is right here at number 2. For each activity, provide a brief description and think about the following: who participated, how often, and to what degree, and how did you know? That was that left side of that kind of plus sign, a slide that I showed a minute ago. So that's that level of participation. And then we asked you to think about, what was the expected depth that students were of thinking that students were asked to engage in. So think about your activities. You can look at them either on the Padlet here. You can reflect about something that's right in front of you right now, or a lesson that you just did today or that you're going to do tomorrow. And we're going to take a couple moments of just kind of quiet reflection time to consider, where would our activities have fallen on that cognitive engagement matrix. All right, so we'll take a couple minutes just to reflect, and then we'll do some share out. Yes, sorry, I just saw that question about in the chat. Here's our chart again. Thumbs up if you could see it. Thank you, Hannah. All right, let's share out just a little bit, and just to be, straight up, don't feel like you have to share, hey, I think my activity was in quadrant one. Like, I mean, if it was, that's good reflection, right? But maybe let's focus our sharing on just how do you know kids are actively participating? How do you know kids are thinking at high levels? What are some things you're reflecting on with regard to your activities and this idea of working our way toward being in quadrant 4 as much of the class period as we can be? You can type in the chat or you can just share out on your mic.
So my first immediate thought was that I think it's valuable to seek different results in different phases of your lesson. So for my hook, I think it's really important that I start with low cognition but high participation. So they get into it, they're excited, and then sort of tier up to that. One of my examples was a poetry analysis of Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. And I start off with pop songs like Ban Perry, Far Too Young to Die, and Kesha's Die Young, and Panic at the Disco, just different songs where the kids are like, I know that song. And then they're excited, they raise their hand. But then you kind of lure them into the high cognition, high participation.
Love that, kind of tried and true. How do I love, and you said hook, how do I hook them in? How do I build some excitement, some engagement, and then kind of carry that forward into where, maybe there's going to be a little higher push on the cognition side.
Let me jump in here. Hannah did a great thing. She said her kids were tired of writing, so she gave them a day to create their thoughts instead of just writing. However, and it sounded like they could do what they wanted to do to create, which is huge.
Yeah, some choice, right? Just offering up some choice. I was going to share that I saw Stephanie added, when I hear as a teacher, hear students doing something on their own, like accountable talk, right? A proud teacher moment. You're like, doing it. And I'm not having to micromanage it all, right? Any others? Oh, I see Trista talked about a spinner, right? Putting names on a spinner. And so I think as I'm reading it, kind of So it's fun with like a random, like you don't know if you're gonna get called, so be ready, that kind of thing. I think I've seen some apps that work like that, kind of random generator apps. All right, we're going to continue to reflect as we move on to our next stop. I'll hand it over to Catherine.
All right, all right. So this is about student ownership, and I think that's why Hannah's little piece jumped out at me, because she gave them ownership there. So we're going to explore what cognitive engagement looks like and what it sounds like. And you know, sometimes good teachers have to deal with the fact that learning can be messy and loud. And then we want to reflect on the role of the teacher and how we plan, and are we supporting those authentic opportunities for students to be engaged? When we plan, did we look at that? You know, it's awfully easy to put all of it on the students, and in worst case scenario, their parents, but sometimes we need to look at how we're planning. So using the following process to reflect on the virtual lesson. Oh, you're going to love this video. We want you to realize that this lesson is a good lesson. Is it the best lesson you've ever seen in your whole life? Probably not. But we want you to try to look through the lenses as a teacher perspective and also from the student perspective. And you're going to see some students that are highly engaged. This is not out of some private high dollar school. You'll see a lot of diversity here, and which is in your real world. And we want you to, there's some guiding questions and some look fors that we're going to come back to. And this is an 8th grade. It's a close read activity. And we'll have some guiding questions and some prompts.
All righty. All right, so with that, we're going to, like Catherine said, we're going to circle in and out of a process. So I'm going to set you up with some guiding questions or a prompt or some look fors. And so you see my little directions that you might want to snap a picture, because then as I transition off of this slide, we're going to go into where the video is. And so you won't be able to see this. And so we'll watch a little segment of the video, then we'll circle back to those guiding questions and do some share out. And we'll do 3 rounds of kind of that same process. Right, set us up, watch, debrief. Okay, so for this first segment, we really are setting the stage. We're kind of digging into some of the logistics of learning in this virtual classroom. And what I mean by that is, you know, some of the procedural or some of the processes that the teacher has in place. How are kids accessing the materials? How are students doing their work? And how is the teacher seeing what work the students are typing or sharing, or how are they interacting with each other? So we want you to notice the logistics of learning. We
and
also
want some clues that the students are participating, which are very subtle.
Thanks, Catherine. And then also some intentional planning and reinforcement that we can bet probably happened, being fellow teachers ourselves, right? What has this teacher done to support increased engagement in this type of environment? But also want to challenge us to think that this same lesson could very easily be done in an in-person classroom. So I think there'll be lots that we can take away from, again, we're not saying this is a perfect lesson, but it's a lesson that has some really neat look fors. So we're going to dive in. Here we go. Now, we've got about 37 seconds.
What we're now going to do is answer question number 2. We're going to go back.
First of all, can you hear a sound? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, good. All right, so just some context. You'll see the teacher at some point in all these faces. You'll see some cameras not on. You'll see some kids sitting on the floor. You'll see one girl sitting in her closet. You'll see all the stuff that you're used to seeing probably. And we also, like I said, notice the logistics. What platform are they on? How are they interacting with each other?
The text and answer the following questions. What do you notice about the author's word choice and imagery? How do those choices impact the reader? I want you to focus on paragraphs 2, 4, and 7. Let me synthesize what I'm seeing. A majority of you talked about how his author's craft moves demonstrate how dangerous the conditions were. Gap I'm noticing is that we all basically said very similar things. And John, I want to push us to come up with a different interpretation.
All right, that was a quick little segment, okay? All right, so what did we notice about logistics of learning? What about some intentional planning and support on the part of the teacher? And I know what you saw there were some splices of segments just setting up really the heart of what we're about to dig into in segment 2 and 3. What were some initial noticings?
I say that the kids came as they were. We saw middle school kids being middle school. You'll even notice one girl, her camera's at an angle. They're using Google. Jared says they're using Google Docs. Perfect.
They are. So I don't know if you noticed that they're in Google Classroom. So some of you may use Google Classroom, or again, different formats. But the teacher can toggle between different students' shared documents. So at any time, a teacher can pull up, pull up Bethany's document. Let's see what Bethany captured in her notes, or let's see what text Becky highlighted on hers. So that kind of logistical aspect. Other noticings.
In the chat, Tina says that the teacher gave a summary of who was meeting expectations. They're sharing and text and verbal. They're doing both. So everybody's got some choices to make. And let's see, there was another one somewhere. Some good comments.
Anybody notice the discussion thread?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of showed it at the very end. So she's had them put some information in this shared Google Doc that each student has one, but she has access to it. And at some point, she's had them put some kind of response in a discussion thread that she's kind of scrolled through and is trying to summarize.
Bethany,
Go ahead, Becky.
I would like some suggestions on, we do not count Zoom attendance for attendance. And so getting kids to actually show up for Zooms, even when we have an open classroom that acts as like a tutoring session, out of 74, I'm lucky to get 4 on some days. So I'm open to suggestions on getting them to sign in and actually attend the Zoom if it's not attached to attendance.
Mm-hmm. Goodness, that's a big question. I think in one regard, as a former administrator, I think we have to think about what's within my locus of control and what's not within my locus of control, and then kind of go from there. I think some of it we know is impacted by other factors, just like we know some kids are, always late to school because of some of those extenuating factors, right? Mm-hmm. In some regard, though, I think using the power of students, and man, this was in one of our materials from last time about kind of understanding the social landscape of your class and who's showing up, who's not showing up, and do students have influence on each other? Again, that could be a whole session in and of itself. So I can't give real quick, this would be like a lengthy discussion, but does anybody have anything? I know one of us shared last time about the little, the feature where the cat scrolls through and the kids love to hold the cat. I can't remember who was that shared that one. But I think little things like that can go a long way. But in some cases, you may just always end up with the same 5 or 6, especially if it's a policy that they're not counted. If it's not counted either way. So then it's like, I just got to do what I can do with those that I do have. But I think you bring up a great question that ties to a larger system, right? Policies and other extenuating circumstances. That's a great question, Becky. All right, well, let's dig into this next chunk. It's about 3.5 minutes. So we kind of have some logistics figured out. All students have their own shared document. All students are expected to respond in the Google thread, and we're going to see some other ways that she has some accountability structures in place. But also, let's take a look at some look-fors. This time, we're going to look for some instructional moves. The teacher expects evidence and precision from students and probes their answers accordingly. So when she says, when I want you engaged, I'm looking for evidence from the text, and I expect there to be precision in your answers. Now, how does she support that? That's what we're going to see. Also, how is she creating a condition where students are encouraged to talk about and build upon each other's thinking? What do we get to see in this lesson that shows us this type of cognitive engagement? And again, watching teacher moves and watching students. We've got about 3.5 minutes or so on this next segment. All right, snap a picture if it's helpful. So evidence and precision. How do we really support students answering, especially wink, wink, when they don't quite get where you want them to go, which is what we're going to see. She's going to have to kind of figure out how to support when they didn't quite get what she was after. And then also building upon each other's thinking.
Different interpretation. So I'm going to highlight some text, and then I'm going to ask you to Zoom chat me what you notice.
All right, just notice she's on one student's document. She's on, I don't know how to say this girl's name, Miss Ellison's document. And so this student already has some stuff highlighted, but you're going to hear her talk about, you know, maybe that she's noticed a trend as she's flipped through all their documents about what they've highlighted or not highlighted.
All right. So in paragraph 2, Lariah highlighted that their knuckles were getting swollen. Their hands also started to have cuts. In paragraph 4, Lariah highlighted that the acid is eating their fingers off. Now, a piece of evidence that I don't think I saw anyone really highlight was in paragraph 7, where, take a look, sometimes the fertilizer man would fall into the vats. I'm going to ask you to participate. What would happen once they would fall into the vats?
If they were to fall into the vats, they if they were to fall into the vats, they would get hurt, or they'll be fished out, right? And then they'll go back to work.
They would get fished out and then they would go back to work. Angel?
I wanted to respectfully disagree with you when you said that they would be fished out and would have to go back to work. No, sometimes when they fell in, they would get like stuck for a couple days because people would forget about them, and then they would get shipped out, and sometimes people would end up eating them.
Hold on. I just saw some of our faces go, what? Our eyes got really big all of a sudden. Angel, go ahead and mute yourself. Let's go back to the text one more time. When we look at paragraphs 2, 4, and 7, we're noticing that people have cuts. Their knuckles are getting swollen. The acid is eating their fingers off. Sometimes they're falling into the vats, they're dying, and their bodies get sent out as food. Hold on. What do you think the impact of Sinclair's writing will be on the reader? I'm gonna put us back into breakout rooms. Please be ready to come back in 90 seconds.
I think that it will make the readers like really disgusted.
Yeah, more cautious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can we say more? Disgusted about what?
Like, they just realized that what they like, they're probably eating people. Like, if they're getting shipped out to other people for them to eat, then they might
keep talking.
Very scared to think that there's a possibility if I fall into a vat, I'll burn alive, which is the most painful thing that can ever happen to a human, and then someone could possibly eat me as lard, like eat the remains of me, and that's disgusting and disturbing.
So I'm hearing you name that the impact on you is that you're like disgusted. What do you think the impact was on the millions of people who might have read his book?
They'd probably be like shocked and even more disturbed. They'd probably be horrified and then angry as well that the I guess factory owners would let this stuff happen. I'd rebel if I were there.
All right, who wants to share? What's the effect on readers? Woo, look at all those hands. Start us off.
Right, let's pause. All right, so let's reflect, right? So what instructional moves did we see? Where did we see expecting evidence and precision? Where did we see the teacher really kind of probing answers and maybe expecting a little bit more? And where do we see students talking about and building upon each other's thinking? How did we see this cognitive engagement level really supported by the teacher?
I think when she sent them to the breakout rooms, it forced them to think more independently instead of relying on the group.
Yes. So that smaller group makes me a little more accountable. Thank you, Becky. Yeah, feel free to just hop on the mic.
Tina mentioned how one student said, "I respectfully disagree." And did y'all see some of the hand signs, things that they were doing?
Yes, we were building and we agree. Love that, Catherine. Yes, right. So accountable talk. So certainly that's something she has taught them how to do, whether it's just her or whether it's a school-wide culture of using those types of hand signals. Oh yeah, so Stephanie says, kept asking to explain their thinking. Can you tell me more? Can you talk more about that? Right, instead of just rounding up an answer. Like, so when a student's close, sometimes we just kind of round it up and then we fill in the blank, but then who did the thinking? Yeah, we do, right? So tell me more, and kind of knowing and maybe having some questions in our back pocket for how I can support without taking away them doing the thinking. Yeah, restated the question when they answered it. So again, that's not something probably most eighth graders do when they just show up to eighth grade, all right? So somebody's had to have taught them how to do that. Any other reflections?
I think when she talks about cognitive learning, I didn't realize she was going to engage all the senses. You can hear it in the tenor of her voice. She does different things with her voice when she's talking to them, which in the online format is vital. She relies on facial expressions, and she relies heavily on emotion. And she caught them in the act of emotion. And that's what she used to pivot that conversation, which I thought was skillfully done.
Wonderfully said, Hannah. If we think about what the research told us, remember, emotional engagement is huge. It's one of the 3 parts of that Venn diagram, right? So the fact that, one, that they're reading a text, that just sets them up for like, whoa, this is like interesting, material, right? But yeah, the way she, kind of leans in, and the way she has that intonation in her voice, right on. She knew when she thought they would probably all go, what? Kind of like she did. But
I couldn't help but think about, you could tell the ones who had not really read because of the shock on their faces. It was hilarious. This is an Upton Sinclair piece, and it did raise some people like, what is this? But those kids who hadn't read it, they were like,
or to layer on the fact that maybe because she noted in her observation to them that she didn't notice something in the discussion threads. She didn't see something she was looking for in their highlighted text. So maybe it's even that they read it, but they just didn't quite put those pieces together, because that's not maybe something they expected, or maybe some of the language was a little different than what they were used to. So hey, talk about the value of a close read, right? Helping students to kind of dig into that, right, with that support. All right, let's finish this out. This time, we're going to think about, let me go back. All right, we're going to look at the teacher creating conditions. Got too many things on my screen here. For student conversations, again, how are we encouraging talk, but for what purpose? This time it's about, building on each other's thinking, clarifying to improve understanding. And also, how is she checking for understanding? Kind of seen it throughout the lesson, but how does she continue to do that here as they build their knowledge through this text? Again, what's it sound like and look like for the teacher and the students? And this is about 4 minutes and some.
On readers. Woo, look at all those hands. Start us off, Ava.
Oh, this is happening.
Ava, you have to unmute yourself.
Unmute.
My book discussed that, like, after, like, say you just read this journal, and then you're seeing how it says, like, there might be human remains in the food that you're eating. You're not gonna think of the workers. You're first gonna think of how, like, this is disgusting. What am I eating? Like, I've been putting this stuff into my body, and now I could be getting sick, or like a bunch of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can you call on someone to build? Wow, so many people whose names I'm gonna jot down.
See the hand signs?
Quickly.
Lariah?
Paige and I talked about how at first, like, we felt very disgusted, especially like in the second paragraph when it talked
Hold
about
up.
like,
Did you connect your idea back to Ava's?
no.
Can you do that now?
I want to build on to you when you said that like you felt like it was disgusting when the text was talking about how like people would get like if they fell, they would get like shipped and then people would eat them. That's very disgusting, and it also makes you feel bad because people had to eat this, and it also makes you feel bad because people are getting eaten and they don't even know it.
So I'm going to synthesize what I heard from a lot of our discussions. Sorry, Eli. I heard a lot of us say that people responded not concerned with their brains, but concerned about their stomachs. They were not concerned about their hearts. They didn't care about the workers. They started to focus on the food. In the text, the author talks about the butchers, the hoisters, the fertilizer men. What do you think the impact of those word choices are going to be on the reader? Not seeing enough hands. Let me give you another tip. What if the author referred to these butchers as Tania, or they said that Elijah and Jalen were the hoisters, or that Ximena was the fertilizer man? The author didn't refer to any of the actual workers by their names. Instead, he talked about them as their jobs. What do you think the impact of referring to these workers by their jobs was on the reader?
And I think I think that how if you go back to like the last lessons and you like if you recap, you could see that how workers can be easily replaced, and like they're like able to hire new workers, and it's that easy. So they didn't really care that much about the workers.
I agree when you said they wouldn't care that much, because when you don't give them an actual name, like their birth name, it wouldn't have that much of an effect on the rich people who are supposed to be helping them. It's just their job. They wouldn't care as much as they would if it was an actual, like if they call them by actual person.
Ooh, the discussion's getting so good. I wonder if we can combine Nevaeh and Paige's ideas. Do you think that the people reading this would care about workers that are replaceable? Because we're running out of time, we're going to hear from just two people. Let's first hear from Paige.
So I said that because they didn't give them an actual name, it wouldn't make people care that much about them because they didn't seem like they were an actual person. It just seemed like they were a worker in a factory.
Nevaeh?
I agree with you, Paige. And to build on, I said that if you recap like from the last few lessons, you can see that like not many people care about the workers. So since there's new immigrants coming, they're gonna be easily replaced. And so the people that have found out that they're eating, if they found out that they were eating humans, they would just care about how is it gonna benefit them, or I mean not benefit, but how is it gonna impact them, and not care about the actual names.
Okay. Woo! Wow, what an amazing class. I'm going to close this out. Here are your final set of directions for today.
All right, let's reflect. What did we see in terms of encouraging students to talk and ask questions, to clarify their understanding? How was she checking for understanding throughout the lesson? How did she adapt the lesson according to student understanding? And how did she expect students to refine? Here in this case, the written and or oral responses, mostly oral responses is what we saw.
Essential questions, teacher prompting, teacher praise. I'm going to take her role. Wendy, let's build on that. you're exactly right. But what did you think? What did you see that she did to get to that place? Anybody? Ashley says, I love how she asked a student, oops, I lost it there. I love how she asked a student to connect his response to the previous one to show how the connection, how it builds. That shows respect, that shows that kids are engaged, but she's also building and to say building on this. That just keeps, how many times do you have discussions and kids just repeat each other? Just, you know, they're going to give you the answer, just move on. Did teacher, was she winging it, or did she have very clear and precise goals that she wanted to achieve? Anybody?
I think it was a combination of both. I think she was prepared, but I think it was also, she was showing her personality when she responded to things. So I think she had enough knowledge. Without the preparation, she can't wing. But I think that she was winging some of it, but was able to do that because of her preparation.
I love that, Becky. That's that whole, like, as a teacher, can I be strategic, right, and dynamic, right? Can I have a strategy, and can I predict where I think they're going to struggle and have a plan? And I saw that when she had the whole, like, the difference between calling them butcher versus calling them by their birth name, as the one student said, and she even used some of their own names. Again, that emotional connection. But then can she also be kind of dynamic in the moment, know how to kind of think on her feet, as I think Jared mentioned.
She also used the word synthesize. And students a lot of times don't know how to answer questions because they don't understand that term. So she was using that term as she was teaching so that they could become familiar with it.
Exactly.
Trista says, we can never predict with full accuracy what will happen with student responses. So she couldn't predict. She knew her kids well enough to know that this topic was going to catch their attention. But with you can call it backward design, or she knew what her goals were. She knew how to guide the discussion where she wanted it without the students feeling like they'd lost their freedom. That's what I thought was amazing.
Yeah, and I love that Hannah, I think, noted the autonomy, right? Some trust between the teacher and students to carry on the conversation. On a side note, earlier today, my son, 7th grade, was in a breakout room, and I just, happened to overhear, and it was just three boys, 7th grade boys, actually doing what they were supposed to do. And I mean, there's just some trust. You just have to trust that it'll happen. But I love how and we caught a glimpse of it in some of the transition, how she bounces from breakout room to breakout room. And in any moment, she's about to be there. So I think there's probably a little bit of that kind of, oh, the teacher could pop in any second, kind of moment. And at one point she said, you got 90 seconds. So there's not a lot of time in some of the breakout rooms. Anyway, so expecting them to get a lot done and not a lot of time. All right. So with that, I would spend in mind a lot more time talking about this video, but we're going to wrap up this section before we move on to our last few minutes together. And as you reflect on this virtual lesson and really the discussion we've had with each other, your peers, what folks have put in the chat or shared out on the mic, is there a teacher move that now you're considering trying with your students? And in the chat, or if you don't care to share out, what's something that you might commit to trying in this next week? Is there something new that you saw here, or something that you've been inspired by listening to a colleague talk about something? What's something that, or maybe you've tried it and maybe it didn't go too well the first time, but hey, you're gonna try it again, right? What's something that maybe you wanna try that's tied to really increasing not only just participation, right, but really that cognitive engagement, kids really doing the thinking?
I think I need to refocus on the breakout room model. We do Google Meets at my school, and every class I teach is hybrid. So I have part are online, part are in person, and it's just logistics. So I need to not pretend I'm smarter than everyone and just go ask for help, because I don't know how to fix this. Y'all may have this problem. Like if I put them into small groups, and they're all in the same room, you have that awful feedback from each laptop. And it works a little better if they have headphones, but you still get that like really terrible time warpy thing. So I need to talk to our tech people and see if anything can be done. And I know in that model, it looked like they were all learning virtually in their homes. So I thought that was I was quarantined twice in the fall and it worked beautifully during that time. But now that I'm back in the classroom, I just need to, troubleshoot some of that, because I think there's so many possibilities if we just open ourselves to it. And I wanted to say one more thing about her layout and her anticipating things. I'm with a bunch of English nerds. Have you guys watched The Queen's Gambit by chance?
Wonderful.
Okay.
It's
so good.
wonderful.
Okay, so the show, and when I was a kid, I was in the YMCA chess club. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone it's a secret there thing. But I've been thinking about chess a lot recently, and how in that show she will envision the board and she'll play out all her moves and really pour her focus into that. And I think that's something that we ought to be doing with our lessons. We need to see what players will say what. How do we react if some kid says this that they're going to say and it's going to make things terrible? How are you going to handle it? So if we treat our lessons like a chessboard, could that enhance our experience and keep us from stressing at the same time?
Hannah, I mean, double hanging.
You know what I heard too, Catherine, is Hannah mentioned what we heard students say from that research.
Yes.
Show us that you're human too. Hey guys, we're going to try this. It might not work out, or I'm not exactly sure how to get this sound to keep from happening, but let's figure it out, right? Just being in that moment and trying it and kind of seeing what happens. I heard other folks say in the chat, maybe trying hand gestures. Several people said that. Instituting some type of process to like explicitly support students in building on each other's ideas, and how do we support them in doing that. Again, sometimes it feels so wonky, but after a while they just start doing it on their own. I think somebody mentioned that earlier, like, woohoo, yeah, when you hear them doing it on their own without a lot of support, that's really cool. All right, we're going to shift to some personal reflection. Catherine, I'll hand it over to you.
So in a reflection, what did the following instructional moves look like? And I hate to read it, but it's so much better than me wandering around. What did the following instructional moves look like and sound like in this lesson? And what impact do these intentional moves have on engagement? I would have to agree that her moves were very intentional, even though they looked spur of the moment and very comfortable. So, we're going to encourage those kids to talk and ask questions. They build on each other. They took their friends' thoughts and they were expected to take it a step further. And that was both the teacher and the students. And then the teacher was checking for understanding throughout the lesson, as we do. I mean, and that's probably one thing you miss about walking around the room, which was an ongoing assessment, formative or whatever. There's some kind of assessment, and that's part of the challenge there that she was kind of working with. Adapting the lesson to the student understanding. The teacher definitely had this going, and expecting students to refine their written and oral responses. If they didn't say it well enough, she knew how to just give that little push and help them clarify their thoughts. I would say those kids walked away from that lesson very proud of themselves for their thoughts.
Mm-hmm. All right, so as we engage in some personal reflection, much like Catherine kind of recap there for us, what's increased engagement look like, sound like, feel like? And part of this takes some personal reflection, kind of like looking in a mirror. So Catherine, you want to walk us through some other things we should consider?
Right. We're all guilty of this, folks. As an administrator, as a teacher, we want the students to be engaged. And how interactive is your own engagement? Are you engaged? I have been in on a lot of Zoom lessons, and I wanted the teacher to be human and ask some questions instead of just regurgitating what chapter that they were expected to have by the next meeting. So, I know you miss walking around the room, but, how engaged are you in this? In what ways are you considering the SEL, the social emotional needs of the students? That's a whole different presentation. But everything that we say and do now, we should be thinking in terms of SEL for our students. And how can you tweak the impact of the lesson engagement? And then what opportunities are you providing to build the relationships? Do they feel, even virtually or hybrid or in person, have you built that relationship with the students where they feel comfortable asking a question, asking for clarification, or giving the clarifying point on their own? In platform, I know some of you are very uncomfortable with giving out your cell phones and things, but do your students have a way to get to you on that interpersonal way for help and clarification? And so this picture is supposed to reflect a teacher looking in the mirror and saying, how engaged am I as I prepare this lesson, as I give this lesson? How engaged am I? So sometimes we need to look in the mirror at ourselves.
And Catherine, I'm just encouraged back to some research that I mentioned earlier, that, when we think about what best supports, right, this type of real authentic engagement, it has a lot to do with culture, right, school culture and classroom culture, and then also that design of the lesson, right? And I love the chess analogy Hannah gave us, and I love how so many of us talked about kind of, really backward designing that lesson, predicting what students might say or not say, what supports they're going to need. And then also, recognizing like, oh man, am I stealing the light bulb moment, right? How can I ensure that they are doing the thinking? How do I ensure that just by design, all students are engaged, right? There's no way just to kind of hide and slink back and kind of surf through the class without really having to be engaged? Or how can I really see into my students' thinking on a regular basis so that I can give that kind of immediate feedback and make some adjustments, much like we saw this teacher do. All right. So in our last few minutes, oh, go ahead, Catherine.
Well, I was just going to say, this is kind of like, this is a little less abrupt than a stop sign. My activity, yes, yes, and yes, or, well, I may need to rethink this and recycle this, but I'm definitely going to reuse this. Okay. So these are just some stop signs that we thought were something that might help you reflect.
All righty. And on that note, let's talk about what's next. And remember, I kind of previewed earlier this idea of an action item. So with that, I can get myself organized here. All right. As a lead teacher within the grant, if you recall, we talked about lead teachers being lead learners, right? And so we want you to share your learning with others in your building, and we're doing our best to make that as painless as possible. And right, feel free to connect with your administrator and talk about ways that this might work best. Remember that within rural life, we're kind of got that magic trio, right? The principal, the lead teacher, and your rural life coach. So again, you can work with your coach, work with your administrator as you talk about the best way to share learning with others. But you're going to have access to a handy template email to make it easy. And then also included with it's going to be a Rural Life Professional Learning resource guide that has information from all 4 of these affinity group sessions. So you were a part of engagement, but also this afternoon we had curriculum support running. We had a small group of lead teachers thinking about feedback. We had a small group thinking about technology. So we've kind of compiled all that together into a little resource guide that we'll continue to add on to as we work our way through the grant. And so, like I said, you're going to get a follow-up email that has this, that has all the information in it too. But work with your rural life coach to talk about how you can take some steps as that lead learner to share information back with your colleagues. All right, so we've done a lot, right? We've made it through the 18th, the 20th, and the 10th, and our next session is February 24th, so just around the corner. But this is a whole group session. Remember, this is all the lead teachers again, not just a small group of us. And so we'll be back with our partners Leading Edge. And then we'll do similar to what we did before. We'll get your all's input about where we want to go for the March 24th. and April 21st dates, and we'll do some small groups again and let you choose what best meets your needs. And then before you know it, summer will be here. Woo! And we'll be thinking about some summer learning opportunities. And soon we'll have some dates for you too, to go ahead and put on your calendar where you and your principal will come together with your coach, and we'll be one big whole group of rural life schools, all 31 schools, and we'll do a couple things together in the summer. All right, let's see. Catherine, can you cue up for us our handy dandy little 1-minute survey? We appreciated last time you all giving such great feedback. Again, it's not about just, you know, the good stuff, right? Feedback is neither positive nor negative, right? How you give it can be positive or negative, but the real intent of feedback is just for improvement. So if you can think of something, anything that would help us improve these sessions for you, make them more useful, more user-friendly, please drop that in our survey.
There it
And
is.
bam.
And
It's 4:30.
while you all are looking, you can look at those other resources and just say your coach is not me, but you want to work with your faculty on engagement. Talk to your coach, because we all have access to each other's work, and it's within our group. So know that.
Very good. And Jared, great question. Right now, our plans are still virtual, right? Until we start to feel a greater sense of safety being in person, but we'll make sure to give everybody enough heads up. And right now, we're just trying to be as flexible as possible. So right now, everything will continue to be virtual until we say otherwise, I guess, right? We'll give everybody enough of a heads up. Jared, I liked your little sidekick you had earlier. 4 of them, 4 sidekicks. Well, you're a trooper. We appreciate you this afternoon. We know lots of us are managing all sorts of stuff right now. So again, we appreciate y'all being here this afternoon. If you don't care to do the survey, we would love it, but feel free to hop off, or we can stay on and answer any questions if you have.
And Bethany, let me remind them, we did include our resource page with links to the videos and articles that we've used and referenced. So, you know, there's the Webb's Death of Knowledge, Bloom's. There's a great article for engaging students in learning from Edutopia. There's that resource page is something you might want to bring up on your screen in some free time and just look at.
Kind of click through. Awesome, Catherine. Thank you. All right, like we said, feel free to hop off, or if you have any questions, we'll hang around for another couple minutes.
Thank you all. It's good to see you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.